I don't remember the moment we fell apart. Not because it wasn't important, but because nothing about it announced itself. There was no raised voice, no slammed door, no night where we said something we couldn't take back. If someone had asked me, while we were still together, whether anything was wrong, I probably would have said no. Or maybe, not really. Which is another way of saying, I don't want to look too closely. We never fought. We just drifted apart. And I didn't realize how far we drifted until I couldn't feel her next to me anymore, even when she was still there. We met in a way that feels unremarkable now. A mutual friend invited us both to a small get-together at his apartment. Not a party. No music loud enough to require shouting. Just a handful of people sitting on mismatched chairs, holding warm drinks, talking about work and rent and plans that never seemed to solidify. I wasn't looking for anyone. I wasn't hopeful. I wasn't freshly brokenhearted. I was just existing. She was sitting on the floor when I noticed her, back against the couch, legs pulled in, listening to someone talk about a job they hated. Not checking her phone, not scanning the room, not waiting for her turn to talk, just listening. That stood out more than anything else. Later, when conversations broke into smaller clusters, I ended up sitting near her. I asked if she knew the host well. Not really, she said. Work friend. College, I said. That was it. That was the beginning. We didn't flirt in any obvious way. We talked about where we grew up, about how neither of us felt particularly attached to the city, even though we'd both been there for years. About how strange it felt to be getting older and still feel like we were improvising adulthood. She spoke quietly, not shy, not hesitant, just steady, like she didn't feel the need to perform. When the night ended, she asked if I wanted her number. No playfulness, no nervous laughter. Just simply, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I said yes. On the walk home, I didn't feel excited. I didn't feel nervous. I felt calm. That was new. We didn't text constantly after that. A message here, a reply hours later. Sometimes a conversation stretched across an afternoon. Sometimes it ended naturally and picked up again days later. No chasing, no testing. When we did see each other, it felt easy. Our first date was coffee in the middle of the afternoon. No alcohol, no dim lighting, no pretense. We sat across from each other and talked about families, shows we liked, jobs we didn't hate but didn't love either. Ordinary things. We stayed longer than we planned, not because the conversation was intense, but because it was comfortable. When we said goodbye, she hugged me. Not too long, not too short, just enough. I remember thinking, I could do this. Not fall in love on purpose. Not plan forever in my head. Just keep seeing her. So I did. We built something quietly. Dinner after work. Weekend grocery runs. Walks with no destination. Long conversations in bed that wandered from nothing to everything and back to nothing again. She had a habit early on of telling me things as they happened. Not big things. Small ones. A weird comment from a coworker. Something her sister said. A thought she had while driving. She didn't save stories. She didn't curate them. They came out naturally, like she didn't have to decide whether I deserved access to them. And I loved that. It made me feel like I was inside her world, not just visiting it. I started doing the same. If something happened at work, I told her. If I felt off for no clear reason, I told her. If I was excited, if I was worried, if something stayed stuck in my head longer than it should have, I handed it to her. Not because she fixed anything, not because she always had answers, but because telling her made things feel lighter. She became the first person I reached for. I became hers. It didn't feel dramatic. It felt normal. Like this is what a relationship is supposed to feel like when it's good. We moved in together after almost 2 years. Not after a milestone. Not after some big conversation where we weighed pros and cons like a business decision. It just made sense. We were already spending most nights together. Already splitting groceries. Already leaving clothes at each other's places. Keeping 2 apartments started to feel unnecessary. So we found one. Small. Old building. Thin walls. Windows that let in good morning light. It wasn't special, but it felt like a place where real life could happen. The first months were full of small negotiations. She liked doing dishes immediately. I liked letting them sit. I left cabinet doors open. She noticed. I forgot. We argued about where to put the couch. We laughed about how bad we were at assembling furniture. At night, we talked in bed about our days, about what annoyed us, about what we were thinking about. Sometimes we fell asleep mid-sentence. There was a sense that no matter what happened during the day, we would end it together. That mattered more than I realized at the time. Looking back, I think that was when I felt most secure. Not because everything was perfect, not because we never had tension, but because I didn't feel alone inside my own head. Somewhere along the way, that started changing. Not in a way I could point to, not in a way I noticed immediately. It happened the way habits fade. Quietly, slowly, almost politely. At first I told myself she was just tired. Work had gotten busier, longer hours, more responsibility. Of course she was exhausted. Of course she didn't always feel like talking. Sometimes she'd come home, drop her bag, and go straight to the shower. Before, she usually sat next to me first, said something small, even if it was only, "Today was weird." Now she didn't. She'd come out, sit on the couch, and scroll on her phone like her body had arrived home before her attention did. If I asked how her day was, she'd say, "Fine," or "Long." I'd ask, "What happened?" She'd shrug, "Just work stuff." At first I tried to ask a little more, gently, not prying, not interrogating, just trying to find the door I used to walk through without thinking. But her answers stayed short, and I started to feel like I was pulling. So I stopped. I told myself this was normal. Long-term relationships settle. People don't talk constantly forever. This is what stability looks like. But something felt different. She wasn't unloading. She wasn't venting. She wasn't reaching. She was already processed, already finished. I started hearing about things later, in passing. Something stressful that happened at work. A conflict with a friend. A decision she'd been thinking about. It would come out casually, like a footnote. "Oh yeah," she'd say. "I told Jenna about that yesterday." Or, "We ended up laughing about it at work." Small sentences, but each one landed heavier than it should have. Because I used to be the person she told first. I didn't say anything. Not because I was afraid of her. Because I didn't know how to explain the feeling without making it sound childish. How do you say, "I miss being your first thought," without sounding needy? How do you say, "I miss being where you land," without sounding like you're trying to control where she puts her weight? So I stayed quiet. And quiet became my default. I started editing myself. If something happened at work, I asked myself if it was worth mentioning. If I felt stressed, I told myself she was already tired. If I felt hurt by something small, I told myself it wasn't important. I began carrying things instead of handing them to her. Not because she asked me to, because I didn't feel invited anymore. We still said, "I love you." But it started sounding automatic, like a line you say at the right moments because you've said it there 1,000 times. We still slept in the same bed, but more nights were spent facing opposite directions. Not in anger, not in tension, just separate. And then this strange thing started happening. I started missing her in small ways. Not her body, not her presence. I missed the version of her who used to look at me when I spoke. I missed the version of her who used to tell me things before telling anyone else. I missed the feeling of being included in her inner life. And the strangest part was that she was still there, still coming home, still sitting next to me, still moving through the apartment like she belonged to it. I was missing someone who hadn't left. That's when I knew something was wrong. Not in a dramatic way, not in a "we need to break up" way, in a quiet, heavy way, the kind that sits in your chest and doesn't ask for attention, just waits. The realization didn't come as a single thought. It came as a pattern, a collection of small moments that started lining up in my head whether I wanted them to or not. One night we were sitting on the couch watching something neither of us was really paying attention to. She laughed at her phone. Not a big laugh, just a small, genuine one. I glanced over automatically. "What's funny?" I asked. She kept looking at the screen. "Oh, Jenna just sent me something." "What did she send?" She hesitated, then said, "I'll show you later." Later never came. It wasn't that she was hiding anything. I believed that. It was that sharing with me wasn't instinct anymore. It was optional. After that, I noticed more. How often she took calls in the other room. Not whispering, not secretive, just elsewhere. How she came home already calm. Whatever stress she'd carried during the day had been worked through with someone else. I got the finished version. The summary, not the raw one. I noticed how she talked about her future. "I'm thinking about taking a trip this fall. I might apply for a different position." Not "we." Not "maybe we could." Just "I." It didn't feel malicious. That was the worst part. It felt unconsidered. Like I simply wasn't part of the picture anymore. We still functioned well. Bills got paid. Groceries got bought. Chores got done. From the outside, we looked solid. But solidity isn't intimacy. We were efficient, not close. I realized how much effort I was putting into pretending I was fine. Not for her. For myself. I kept telling myself this is what long-term relationships look like. They're quieter. They're calmer. They're less intense. All of that can be true. But there's a difference between calm and empty. And I felt empty in a way I didn't know how to explain. The moment that finally broke through my denial happened on an ordinary Tuesday. Nothing special. Nothing symbolic. I came home early from work. I'd finished a project and decided to cook. Not a grand gesture. Not a romantic plan. Just something warm. Something shared. I texted her, home early. Making dinner. She didn't reply. I assumed she was busy. I cooked anyway. Pasta. Simple. I set the table. 2 plates. 2 forks. I lit a candle and almost laughed at myself, then left it. She came home about an hour later than usual. She walked in, dropped her bag, and said, "Hey." "Hey," I said. "Dinner's almost ready." She nodded and went to wash her hands. When she came back, she looked at the table. "Oh," she said. "You cooked?" "Yeah. Thought we could eat together." There was a pause. Small. Not tense. "I already ate," she said. "I grabbed something with Jenna after work. Forgot to tell you." She said it like information. Not like an apology. Not like something that mattered. "Oh," I said. She sat down anyway and pulled out her phone. I served myself. We sat there in silence. She scrolled. I ate. She didn't ask how my day was. She didn't ask why I was home early. She didn't notice the candle. She wasn't being cruel. She wasn't trying to hurt me. She just didn't think of me. That was the moment. Not because she ate without me. Not because plans changed. But because it hadn't occurred to her to tell me. Hadn't occurred to her that I might be part of the decision. I realized then that I wasn't the person she checked in with anymore. I wasn't the person she reached for. I was the person she came back to after everything else. There's a difference. I didn't say anything. I didn't know how. If I said, "You forgot about me," it would sound small. If I said, "I feel invisible," it would sound dramatic. So I stayed quiet. But something in me shifted. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. After that, coexisting got easier and harder at the same time. Easier because I stopped expecting things I wasn't getting. Harder because I could feel how much I was shrinking. We became very good at living side by side. We were polite, functional, calm. And I was lonely in a way that felt embarrassing to admit, because the relationship still looked fine. Sometimes I thought about leaving. Not in a concrete way. Not with plans. Just as a passing idea. What would it feel like to live alone? The fact that the thought didn't scare me scared me. Still, I stayed. Not because I believed things would change. Because leaving felt like admitting something had already ended. And I wasn't ready to call it that. We eventually had a conversation. Not a big one. Not a dramatic one. We were doing dishes. Water running. Plates clinking. I said, "Do you ever feel like we don't really talk anymore?" She paused. "I don't know," she said. "We talk. Not like we used to," I said. She shrugged. "People change." That was it. Not cruel. Not defensive. Just flat. I wanted to say, "I miss being your person." I wanted to say, "I miss being the one you tell things to first." But I didn't. Because I didn't know what I would do with her answer. So we kept living. Side by side. Months passed. The distance didn't explode. It settled. We still went to family events together. Still posted photos. Still looked fine. But I felt like I was living with someone who used to love me. One night, she fell asleep on the couch. I watched her. Not with anger. Not with longing. With familiarity. Like looking at an old photograph. And I realized something that made my stomach drop. If we broke up tomorrow, our daily routines wouldn't change much. That's when I knew we had crossed a line. We never fought. We just drifted apart. And drifting has a way of making everything feel normal until it suddenly doesn't. Eventually, she said she wanted space. Not in a dramatic way. Not as an ultimatum. Just casually, like she was talking about changing her schedule. "I've been thinking about staying with Jenna for a bit," she said. My first feeling wasn't panic. It was relief. I hated myself for it, but it was honest. "Okay," I said. She looked like she expected me to argue. I didn't. She packed a small bag. When she hugged me, it felt familiar. And empty. After she left, the apartment felt quieter. But also lighter. Not in a happy way. In an honest way. After a week, she texted, "I think I need more time." I stared at the message, then typed, "Yeah, that makes sense." That was it. No big breakup conversation. No final fight. Just a slow acknowledgement. When she came back to get the rest of her things, we were polite. We said, "I'm sorry," and didn't specify what for. Then she left. I didn't collapse. I didn't scream. I sat on the couch and felt tired. Not devastated. Not angry. Just tired. I realized I'd been grieving the relationship while we were still in it. I just hadn't admitted it. I didn't wake up the next day feeling different. There was no sense of a new chapter starting. No clarity. No surge of strength. Just the same apartment. The same couch. The same light coming through the blinds in the morning. Only now there was no shower running. No drawer opening. No soft noise of someone else starting their day. I went to work. Answered emails. Nodded in meetings. Said, "Good," when people asked how I was. On the outside, nothing about me looked altered. Inside, I felt like I was carrying something fragile I didn't have language for. Not grief. Not relief. Not freedom. More like a low-level awareness that something important had changed shape. For a while, I kept expecting a delayed reaction. I thought one night I'd break down. That I'd suddenly miss her in a sharp, overwhelming way. That I'd regret not fighting harder. None of that happened. What came instead was quieter. I noticed how much energy I'd been using just to maintain a version of myself that fit into her shrinking availability. How often I edited my thoughts before speaking. How frequently I swallowed small disappointments and called it maturity. That realization sat heavy. Not because it made me angry, because it made me aware. I replayed small moments, not obsessively, just because they surfaced. Her coming home and going straight to her phone. Me choosing not to bring something up because it didn't feel worth the effort. Both of us making comfort the default. None of those moments looked significant on their own. Together, they were the whole story. At night, my mind felt quieter than I expected. Not peaceful, just not bracing. I hadn't realized how often I'd been preparing myself for half attention, for delayed responses, for disinterest. Without that preparation, there was space. Empty space, but honest space. Sometimes I filled it with noise. Shows playing in the background. Music I didn't really listen to. Scrolling without reading. Sometimes I didn't. Sometimes I just sat there and felt how uncomfortable it was to realize I'd been disappearing in slow motion. I started paying attention to instincts. When something funny happened, I noticed the reflex to reach for my phone. Not to text her. That habit faded faster than I expected. But to tell someone. Anyone. A thought. A reaction. A small piece of my day. Sometimes there wasn't a clear person in mind. That scared me more than missing her. Because it meant I'd lost touch with the part of myself that expects to be heard. Not by a specific person. By someone. I didn't want to replace her. I didn't want to jump into something new. I wasn't looking for another relationship. I was trying to remember what it felt like to exist without shrinking. To speak without checking if it was too much. To feel without minimizing. I don't think staying with her broke me. But I do think it taught me how quietly you can disappear if you're not paying attention. Not because someone erases you. Because you slowly erase yourself to fit into a smaller space. I don't carry anger toward her. If anything, I carry a strange gratitude. Not for the ending. For the clarity that came after. I know now what I don't want. I don't want to be the person someone updates. I don't want to be the person who finds out later. I don't want to be the place someone returns to after they've already emptied themselves somewhere else. I want to be a place. Not a location. A place. Somewhere someone goes first. That doesn't mean exclusivity. It doesn't mean control. It means priority in a quiet, unspoken sense. The kind you don't have to ask for. Sometimes I wonder if she ever noticed the shift. If she ever realized she had stopped reaching for me. If she ever felt the same quiet loneliness and didn't know what to call it. Maybe she did. Maybe she didn't. I'll never know. And I've made a kind of peace with that. Not closure. Not resolution. Just acceptance that some stories don't end with answers. They end with awareness. There are still moments when something happens and my first instinct is to tell her. Not because I want her back. Not because I miss her specifically. Because she was my habit. Habits don't disappear just because circumstances change. They fade slowly. When that instinct shows up, I let it pass. I don't judge it. I don't romanticize it. I just notice it. Noticing has become the thing I trust most now. Noticing when I feel open. Noticing when I feel closed. Noticing when I start making myself smaller. I don't always know what to do with what I notice. But I know what happens when I ignore it. We never fought. We just drifted apart. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Not in a way that announced itself. It happened in increments. In pauses. In conversations that almost happened. And I stayed longer than I should have after I felt it. Not because I was noble. Because I didn't know who I was without the version of myself that existed inside that relationship. There isn't a triumphant ending to this. I'm not suddenly healed. I'm not suddenly wiser. I don't have a neat conclusion. I just have a clearer understanding of what it feels like to lose someone without ever fighting them, to fall out of love without ever hating each other, to drift apart without anyone pushing. That's the truth I carry now, quietly, like everything else in this story.